I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Are you ready to win at the game of life? Well, throw out that rulebook and get down to the business of being the best and most authentic version of you. Welcome to the Human Design Podcast. We're changing the rules around success, abundance, purpose, love, and life, where we're creating a planet where everyone can thrive in a world that loves and supports each other. I'm your host, Emma Dunwoody, a qualified master coach, human design expert, podcaster, and entrepreneur that is living the life of my dreams, breaking all the rules while doing it, making a huge impact, and living my design and manifesting miracles on the daily. Join me as I break down and simplify everything you need to live in alignment with your human design, teach you how to recondition your unconscious mind for greatness, and to take back your power so you can manifest your heaven on earth and serve the rest of the planet at the same time. It's time to give up the fear and step into your highest potential, to reach for the stars, to know and live your greatness. It's what you deserve, and it's what the planet really needs from you. So buckle up and enjoy the ride.
This is your monthly reminder to go to the show notes and check out the Body Graph Chart software. I know you've heard us talk about this before, so I'll keep this very short and very sweet. But if you want to know the tool that we've used to bring in over 20,000 new leads and 5 figures in passive revenue into our business, then go check it out. It's amazing. Stop sending people away to other people's websites to get their human design chart. Instead, use this tool to put it on your own website. You won't regret it. And use the code Human Design Podcast, all lowercase altogether, Human Design Podcast, to get 50% off for a year.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. Well, on my episode today, I am talking to someone who I'm having kind of a weird experience because it's such a familiar voice, but it's someone that I've never met before in my life. So I'm super excited to share Jeff Krasno with you all. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me and connecting me to your wonderful community. You've done such great work, Emma.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And right back at you. I am super excited to have you on for so many reasons, but I don't want to get ahead of myself yet. I want to make sure I share with the listeners your human design. So you are a 1-3 emotional manifesting generator, and you are the cross of planning. Now, I'm also a cross of planning, so I know this sort of overarching energy of yours really well. And of course, I literally pulled up your chart because I had, an instinct, let's say, that there's this particular, what we call a gate and a channel, would have to be in your chart. And the thing that blew my mind is that the cross of planning is all about building really powerful communities. And I'm like, I just knew it. I knew you would be a cross of planning because you have such an incredible community with Commune. So Jeff, do you want to introduce my listeners? I'm pretty confident a lot of them already know who you are and a little bit about your journey, but I'd really love you to share your journey. You've done a bunch of things. You've been an athlete. You're a successful entrepreneur. Very manifesting generators are non-linear, so they kind of jump all over the place into a bunch of different things. So I would love you to share a little bit of that journey of, how you came to be here in this seat today.
Yeah, well, thanks for that opportunity. I'll try to be less peripatetic than my life actually was. But I guess I'll leapfrog my first 10 years and just say I moved 11 or maybe 12 times before I was 7. So I lived overseas and in many different countries and spoke many different languages. And that was introduced to many different cultures. I lived in northern England. I lived in Spain. I lived all over Brazil. And of course, that's a wonderful opportunity as a young person to be able to avail themselves of all those cultural differences and food and music and everything that comes with it. But I will also say, and I've never really done this in an interview format before in this manner, but I will say that the tricky side of it was, I was a very chubby kid. B, I was moving around every 4 to 6 months into a new school, into a new culture, often with a new language. And kids just want to fit in. They just want friends. And as my friend and mentor Gabor Mate often says, people in general, but specifically kids, will always sacrifice their authenticity for belonging, for connection. And certainly that was me. So my parents sort of helped set the table for me to be a bit of a people pleaser, and then as a means to try to fit in. And then, of course, it took me about 5 decades, but I eventually realized that my Achilles heel could also be my superpower if I could transmute it. And when I started to examine the threads of my life, as you pointed out, I realized that I did have some sort of gift, or potentially some refined emotional intelligence, to be able to convene people and to become, I guess I might say, some degree of a community galvanizer, or fostered a tremendous amount of community. Largely, like, the first big opportunity I got to do that and to flex those muscles was starting a festival brand called Wanderlust, which really was part serendipity and part just torch bearing from my better three quarters, my wife Skylar, who has been a yogi since I knew her. I met her when I was 17. And I've chased her around the world in the name of chivalry, but also yoga. And
it.
so
I love the better three quarters too. Just got to say, I love it.
Yeah, I took a lot of bumpy trips on puddle jumpers, chasing her to far flung retreat centers, and had an utterly male idea in the rainforest of Costa Rica as I enjoyed this kind of beautiful yoga retreat experience. It's like, well, what if I could scale this idea and make it the biggest yoga retreat in the world? And that was sort of the genesis, or the primordial soup of Wanderlust, or what became Wanderlust, which was this combination of, I suppose for Australia, maybe you'd know it as Big Day Out, and here we know it as like Lollapalooza or Bonnaroo, sort of a combining a music festival like environment and production with a wellness conference. And that was I got that out of the gates in 2009. I made every mistake possible known to mankind, but sharpened my various tools, and built that business, which brought together just beautiful, like-minded souls around the core tenets of wellness, with yoga and mindfulness being kind of at the center of the bullseye there, but certainly other related ideas, integrative health and medicine and regenerative agriculture, all the kind of other things, organic food and biodynamic wine, all the things that I was interested in. And was fortunate enough to scale that. I think in 2016, we were at our peak. We had 68 events in 20 countries, and a very considerable presence in Australia and New Zealand. We had and that was a big chunk of my life. It was the ultimate party, kind of. It was like, in a way, in retrospect, I realized it served my own needs, because I got to bring all of these people who I loved and respected under one enormous tent, in this case, kind of literally. And it was it was just the ride of my life. I have 3 daughters. They grew up basically in the circus, like traveling from event to event to event to event for years. And it was wonderful. And then it came to a close as that chapter, but it was wonderful. And I'll just stop there, because you may have questions. Yeah.
I want to jump in, because the Big Day Out was like foundational in my life. Like, I actually said to my eldest son's just about to turn 17, and about a couple of weeks ago, I'm like, you do realize that I went to the first ever big day out? Like, I went to the
Yeah.
first and the second, and he's like, what, Mum? You went to
Yeah.
all of those fests? I'm like, yeah, baby. Like, they were just so much a part of my 20s, you know, like it was just such a big thing. And I just want to geek out a little bit on your human design, you know, because just hearing this story alone, like, yes, community's massive. As I said, I'm actually the same cross. And one of the things that we do, we have in-person retreats. And one of the things I love the most is we take our crew all over the world. And we were in Mexico last year, and the guy that we were renting the house from, he's like, you bring your own chef all the way from Australia? And we're like, yeah, because it's just as much fun for us as it is
Yeah.
for all the
That's
people
right.
on it. So I totally get it. And that line 3 of yours is the adventurer, you know, like whenever you have a line 3 in your profile, you don't want to live a conventional life. You want to, you know, get out there and see the world. And yeah, so it's so cool hearing this unfolding, and something that's so pivotal. And just as a little story, as I said, first ever big day out, so pumped. We were standing at a place in Melbourne called Flinders Street Station, and I realised, because this is still when you had to have the paper ticket, and I'm standing at the station going, oh my God, I've left my tickets at home. And I remember like all my friends going, how could you leave all the tickets at home? So I think we missed like the first act, but given that it went on like all day and all night, it was all okay in the end. But yeah, it was such great memories.
Yeah, well, I'm able to facilitate for my children. My middle daughter just went to Coachella, and that was her big Christmas present. And you know, dad was a hero for a day.
Yeah, don't you love those days when you're like the cool parent? Like, yep, you're cool for a moment.
Yeah, it's fleeting, but I will. I'll sit under the tree that I planted for a day.
Yeah,
Anyways.
exactly. I love it. So obviously you've taken this community from traveling all over the world, and you've moved it into this health, well-being, you know, this community that's helping to, you know, build wellness all over the world. So tell us a bit about Commune. I actually remember when it launched, and I was like, wow, like from I remember Russell Brand sitting at a desk on like top of a cliff or something, and just being like, oh, this is great. So tell us a bit about Commune.
Yeah, it's funny that you remember that image. So that's at our retreat center in Topanga. And we were somewhat mimicking a Monty Python skit, and Russell was on board. So yeah, we put a desk right at the end of the summit. And I think he was hosting a summit, which he loved to take literally there in that point. Yeah, so you know, in the alpenglow of Wanderlust, at least my role operationally in Wanderlust, I was kind of searching for ways to make really large scale impact, and bring the ideas of all of these great authors and thought leaders and teachers that I had met, you know, to a broader audience. And Wanderlust scaled about as big as it could get, but you know, we still, you know, it was a couple 100,000 people a year that would come. That's amazing, but that's not going to really bend the arc of history. I was like, could we, you know, bring these practices to millions of people or a billion people? That's a real impact. And so I was just almost randomly put on this list called the Super Soul 100, which was Oprah's kind of handpicked 100 entrepreneurs. And I really just refer to myself as number 99, just given who else is on that list. But it got me invited to a lot of things. And lo and behold, one day there I was at brunch sitting across the table from Oprah, and I had like a dad joke prepared and ready, and I because I had been a fan of the many meditation challenges that she had done with Deepak Chopra, and I had taken that was kind of my introduction in some ways to meditation. And I told her, I was like, "Oh, it's just great to meet you. I was such a big fan of those meditations. I always felt like that you should have married Deepak." And she kind of like looked at me a little bit cross-eyed, and I said, "Well, because you could have been Oprah Chopra." And
I
it
love
was
it.
like just awful dad joke. I've got a quiver full, but
I
she
love
thought that
it.
was funny enough to sort of like engage with me, and kind of it sort of opened things
The
up.
door, yeah.
And I said, "Hey, listen, my wife's a yogi, and you've done such an incredible job bringing meditation to so many people through your program. Would you ever want to partner on something similar, but for yoga?" And she was like very funny and kind of cheeky. She's like, "No, this body doesn't do yoga," and kind of thing. I'm like, "No, no, no. This is not about like popping up into a handstand on a whim. This is, the fundamentals of yoga at a very, beginner level. And it's just about making a bigger tent for this practice that I think can really help a lot of people."
Yeah.
And slowly I did convince her, and there's a lot of wrinkles to this story, but she really just was very generous, and her team was very generous in sharing the model with which they had grown these meditation challenges. And we partnered on this project, and I shot it for like $1,000 in my living room with my wife, and built this platform. And all of a sudden there was 125,000 people enrolled in it. And I was like, wow, this is a really amazing way to scale these practices and ideas. And I've been fortunate enough to meet all these great teachers. What if I essentially started what I at that point called like the master class of well-being, and yeah, called a few of my friends, and everyone was on board to do some courses. And that was 5 years ago. And then, I wanted to, and then, subsequently we built a fairly prolific roster of teachers who we've all made we've made courses with, online courses. And kind of contemporaneous to launching the business, my wife and I bought this funky, amazing 10-acre property up in Topanga, California, which is, for those of you not familiar with the California geography, it's kind of up near Malibu, but it's up in the hills, and it's got sort of a hippie, funky reputation to it. And we built this wonderful retreat center and production studio because I was dead set on, I didn't want to build a media company that was just based out of, a windowless, nameless brick studio building in Hollywood. I wanted to build this breathing organic thing with chickens and bees and compostable toilets and things that go wrong and
Yeah. Oh my
things
God.
that
Dream come
break.
true. Yeah.
And we built all these cabins, and then built the whole production facility up there, and have been lucky enough to host all these people. I mean, Deepak and Gabor Mate and Marianne Williamson and Wim Hof and Russell, and tons of amazing doctors, tons of female, like just absolutely cutting edge, amazing female doctors, um, and host events and retreats up there, and kind of build the media company within that setting. And yeah, it's just been a great, very gratifying just run for the last 5 years. Of course, I had my own personal problems, that I had to solve, related to my own health. And in a way, commune has been completely central and instrumental for me getting on my own healing journey, and finally taking my own advice for once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And you know what I love? I've heard you mention a couple of times, like, and almost slightly reservedly, like, oh, it's selfish, or it's my own journey, or it's and from a human design perspective, again, your profile, you've got a 1-3 profile. It's what we call a personal profile, and it's the most personal of all the profiles. And what that means is that your personal journey is what you're here to give to the world. Like, you're designed to focus on your journey, to be a little bit selfish, because when you're a little bit selfish, then you have so much to give to the world. And a lot of what you're here to give to the world is not only this beautiful foundation of knowledge, because that's one of your superpowers, like really diving super deep into the knowledge, and all your experiences, like bringing all of these experiences. So again, I love, for me, human design is something that it's our treasure map. It's something that is going to guide us to the treasure. But at the end of the day, we're the treasure. So we have to take responsibility. Like anything else, it's a model. It's not who we are. So I just love when I hear people just speak their design. Like, there it is. You didn't need to know it. You didn't need to do, learn all the knowledge and do all the things. You're just like, yes, that's what I'm doing on a daily basis. And from being, selfish, look how much impact you're having in the world. Like, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. My eldest daughter, who's really just thriving right now and doing so well, we were commiserating, and she dubbed me a humble narcissist, and which I thought was really kind of spot on, because she was kind of admitting to being one as well. And I've long reflected on this tenet in that kind of is conciliant across many, many spiritual traditions. We kind of know it as the golden rule, which is, love thy neighbor as thyself. And we always think about that aphorism as loving thy neighbor. But in order to actually fulfill the equation to love thy neighbor, you actually have to love thyself.
Yep.
And it took a long time to cultivate that sense of selfishness, such that one actually can love thyself and then project that upon the world around one. And I think that's kind of one, that golden rule is so prevalent, in every religious tradition and philosophical tradition. But I think sometimes it overlooks the importance of self-love. But the humble narcissist seems to have
brilliant.
it.
And just FYI, your human design supports that too. Yeah.
Good. I'll let her know.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you brought up the golden rule, because this is something that I remember when I was doing my coaching training. So I'm a master coach, behavioral coach, as well as doing human design. And I remember contemplating this golden rule piece and learning simultaneously at the same time that, not to make assumptions, not to assume you know what other people are thinking or doing. Like, my whole job as a coach is to get super curious and understand how people, how they're creating their own reality and da-da-da-da. And when I came across human design, and I've used other behavioral profiling tools in the past that have also been really powerful, it's just, this is the thing that's incredibly detailed and powerful. And the golden rule for me, I feel like there's this part of it that falls down where we're treating other people as we think they need or want to be treated. When we dive into something like human design, one of the things that's been so incredibly powerful for me as a coach, as a mother, as a friend, is understanding actually how these people in front of me need to be supported and treated and taken care of, because you and we actually have a lot of energy. We're manifesting generators. Whereas my ex-husband, he was a projector, and he needs to be recognized all the time. And I'm totally driven, to do my work and do all these things, but he actually needs to be recognized for his wisdom. And so when we really sort of dive into this whole, like, getting to know the other as they are, I think for me, the golden rule is like, treat others as they need to be treated, or as they're designed to be treated.
Yeah, that's insightful, and that's interesting. I think in order to do that, you probably do need to cultivate a fair amount of like EQ or emotional intelligence, A, and B, you probably also need to have good emotional regulation. I'm not sure I'd be able to really truly dissect someone's prototype or how they need to be treated unless I myself was in a sort of ventral vagal activated state, if you will, sort of in a um, you know, say coming from a setting of safety and security, such that like the aperture of my attention is actually wide and open instead of
Yeah.
sort of tight and narrow. And I feel when, and candidly, like just like anyone, I can move into sort of a dorsal vagal state or a highly, sympathetic overload state. But I seem to be, have it, tools to bring me back into the Goldilocks zone most of the time. Um, but I realize, that is a skill in of itself to be able to really put your thumb on what other people truly need and what their desires are. I had this whole crazy experience in 2020 where I had 26, 27 Zoom calls with people that disagreed with me about something, and had taken offense to something that I had written or said. So I had this whole 2-month period where I was kind of leaning into what I call stressful conversations. And that really helped me refine that ability to seek connection over agreement, or really seek connection over solution. To listen, to understand, and not just to listen to respond.
Yeah.
And that is a skill that I've really got to put to use, kind of as it's like I'm in a very liminal place in my life. I have living parents that are older, in their 80s, and I'm also a very active dad. So it's like I'm in the middle of a lot of dynamics,
Yeah.
social and emotional dynamics, and that's having those stressful, hard conversations. Really, it does help train you to then be able to engage with the people that you love the most in emotionally regulated ways.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree. I think one of my favorite principles, I'm sure it's a spiritual principle, is, be curious, not judgmental. I'm so
Mm.
aware and have been I'm a highly sensitive person from a very young age. I was so aware of what was going on around me. Um, and I just had that natural um, muscle that I was building of just putting myself in someone else's shoes. Like, why would they have reacted that way? And learnt not to take things personally. At least into my 30s, I started to not take other people's behavior personally and started to realize, like, wow, there's all these other things going on for them. Um, and yeah, I feel like this is a muscle. And I actually listened to a recent podcast where you talk about having those challenging conversations. And I do believe, like everything, it's a muscle, and the more
Mm-hmm.
that you can sit in that space and hold space and listen and receive, and without being reactionary, without being judgmental, just being super curious where this is coming from. Yeah, it's really powerful the more you can do it. And I know for me as a parent, it's been a game changer. Just the other day, I got grumpy at my kids for something, and my eldest just turned around to me and said, "Mum, I'm sorry that I didn't do this thing, but I feel like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. Like, everything else is really good." And, in that moment, I'm like, "Oh, dude, sorry. I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right." Went and apologized to his younger brother because I, lost my shit over something. And, I think it's those places for me that it really matters, because I'm demonstrating to my children that I can take feedback, that I'm going to apologize for something that I've done wrong, which gives them the opportunity to build courage to say the thing instead of, diminishing themselves. So yeah, I love that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, having children is the ultimate test there, because you're staring in the mirror half the time, and you, the things that are apt to trigger you um, often don't have their provenance in your child, but often in yourself, right? So,
Exactly.
and the patterns that you've developed in your own life that either they mimic or that you've lopped upon them in some fashion. And this is honestly where like a lot of the practices and protocols that I started to instill in my life actually began to really spill over into my parenthood. Even like fasting. So I became kind of a intermittent faster, and and you know so for me that looked like just consolidating all of my consumption of food into an 8-hour window. So I wasn't like a crazy week-long water fast. I was just like 16-8 guy.
Yeah.
But like that didn't mean that I didn't get hungry in the other 16 hours. I still did, right? But because I became kind of a disciple to this practice, at 9 p.m., I couldn't just mindlessly, unconsciously wander to the fridge and take out, whatever, a bag of chips from the cupboard. And, because I had adopted that practice, it really made me examine the stimulus of hunger, for example, in this case. And, Viktor Frankl has a sort of very famous quote, which I will, butcher in some fashion, but, between stimulus and response, there is a space. Within that space lies our freedom or our liberation. And, being a faster, I had to examine the nature of this stimulus called hunger. And then in that space, because I wasn't just mindlessly going to the freezer, I was forced to delineate really whether or not that hunger had its origin in a biological need or in some kind of like emotional desire. Was I just like eating my feelings, or eating because I was bored, or eating because someone insulted me on Instagram, or, whatever, fill in the blank. And, that space there was so helpful, because what I was doing was making unconscious behavior conscious, and untangling it and looking at it in its eye. And so what I mean there, as it kind of began to punctuate my parenthood, is that same deal. There would be a stimulus like but in this case would not be hunger. It would be one of the million annoying, aggravating things my kids do. Yeah. And instead of unconsciously just reacting in the moment and losing my shit or doing whatever I might do, I could find that space in which I could examine the nature of the stimulus, of the behavior, and just question it for a second. Like, what is the provenance of this behavior? Well, why is this happening? What's coming up? Or why is this coming up? And then be able to, generate an adequate response to it. That could be, disciplinarian if it needed to be, but generally needed to be kind of loving.
Yeah.
And so this is, as we age, hopefully we get a little bit wiser, and we start to use these tools. For me, obviously, like fasting was had a huge impact on my health. But I would say where it was even more useful was in this capacity it gave me to find space between being an idiotic parent, or being addicted to Instagram, or buying something on Amazon, or drinking the third glass of wine, or whatever, So
I love that.
Yeah.
I think so. There's so much in there. I think that is just beautiful. And from a human design perspective, there's a part of our chart that's actually the gene keys that talks about our core talent. And you actually have this gene key, or this gate, that's 29, which is all about commitment. And it means that in its shadow state, you just commit to anything. You're like, yep, I've got all this energy, I'll just do it, I'll commit to everything, yep. And then you end up burning out, or you're like, why did I ever commit to that? But then when you commit to the correct thing, then you have this like almost this ability to succeed where others haven't, and this ability to, let's look at Wanderlust, like create something that can be absolutely extraordinary because of this incredible commitment of yours. So again, just loving hearing this expression of your human design. And talking about fasting, let's talk about, a large part of your focus and expertise these days is about wellness. I've been following people like yourself. I actually just interviewed Dave Asprey the other week. I've, been in this world for a long time, and longevity and health span is something that's really important to me. And I was listening to the podcast, the episode, and now I can't remember the doctor's name, but it was at the Health Wheel.
Yeah. Darshan.
Yeah, Darshan, that's
Yeah.
it. And just loving every second of it. And then every now and then I get this like wave of overwhelm of like, there's so much, and in this podcast, it kind of like really stepped out. Okay, these are the things that you could start with. But a lot of my listeners are also listeners of yourself or Dave Asprey or people that are very into health and well-being. So I'd really love you just to break down. First and foremost, I'd love to hear like what are the like 3 things we can be doing to add to our longevity, because I'm like Googling, what is it, DEXI scans or whatever they're called up. I'm like, wow, there's all these things. And, I already do a lot of things. We have an ice bath here. I'm just about to get a sauna. Like there's a lot of stuff that we do already, but it just gets so overwhelming. So I'd love to hear like, what are the 3 things my listeners can do? And maybe it's 5 things. You're a manifesting generator. You might have more than 3. That they can do to focus on longevity. And I'd love a spin of the whole being a woman thing, because what I mean by that is like so much of the research is not done on us. And I remember having a conversation with one of, I did a retreat at Gary Goro's place, Soma, recently, and one of his business partners who does all the health stuff, he's talking about recovery. And I was having this conversation, like as a woman, I love things like saunas and ice baths and that sort of thing, but recovery's got to be different, because I just can't be doing that to myself all the time. It doesn't feel like I'm recovering. It just feels like I'm overstressing my body. So I would love kind of your, like over the things that we could be doing, talk a bit to women and women's biology and how we know what is best for us, this individuality that you talk about. That was a really big question. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I got you. Well, first of all, it's interesting that what I call deal bias is in my design, because you're absolutely right. It's my instinct is always to say yes, let's do it. And as I've gotten a little bit older, I've gotten a bit better at being able to decipher what are the friendly asteroids and what are the ones that I don't want to jump on or sometimes shoot down. I think it's very funny, the individuality versus general principles balance, because 99.9% of my DNA is a perfect match with yours. And there's probably certain apologies that should come with that. But it is that, we have so many of the same underlying mechanisms, right? We use energy substrates and oxygen, to make energy in our mitochondria. Like that happens in you and in me pretty much in the same exact way in some ways. And then we are obviously different in terms of our genetics, in that 0.1%. And so we're all, we're going to have different morphology and, different SNPs and mutations and stuff that will kind of make my genetics act a little bit different than yours. Obviously, we were raised by different parents, and we have different environment and different culture. So that's going to have huge influence, really more influence than our underlying genetics in terms of our health, day to day. And then obviously there's a difference of sex. you know, male hormones, female hormones, etc. So all that being said, as a major proviso, you know, I do like to focus on like general principles, you know, for well-being, and then give the shades of nuance, you know, as they pertain to all the ways that we are different.
Yeah.
So the way I generally think about that, the lens through which I would answer the question, what are the three things that one might do if one's really trying to, you know, focus, major in the majors, as they say, is I often ask, like, well, how did I evolve? You know, because essentially my genetics are the same as my great 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 great, let's spend the whole rest of this other saying great grandfather. You know, and you know what is obviously patently different than how, you know, my distant hunter gatherer ancestor on the Serengeti lived is our culture. And, you know, in what ways has culture really kind of influenced human health, and how can we essentially leverage our core engineering, you know, this miracle that is your organism, and how it's designed, you know, for optimal health. So to answer that question, let's my three would be really just food. Well, I'll start with food and then movement, and then I would say the last one is just our mind and slightly more spiritual approach to how we're living. So with food, you know, I asked the question, how did we evolve? Well, okay, we were opportunistic omnivores, right? We ate a massive variety of foods, you know, 800 different plants and seeds and tubers and roots, you know, occasional wild game, fantastic. So what does all that mean? That means like, you know, really getting a ton of phytonutrients, eating a ton of variety of plants and vegetables, getting great lean protein, however you want to get it. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, great. If you like, you know, ethical, pasture raised meat, great. You know, I'm not going to get fundamentalist about one way or another, but you need to get a certain amount of lean. Well, I like lean protein, but a certain amount of protein and a ton of fiber. And really, that's that simple. You know, just ask yourself the question, how did I evolve? What is my design? And then try to align with that. So for me, that looks like eating 30 different kinds of plants per week, more or less. I try to get, you know, zero point 0.8 grams per ideal body weight of protein every day, but I'm not neurotically scribbling it down per se. And I try to eat fiber, and I don't eat all the time. That's the big thing for me. You know, I already mentioned my fasting protocol, but at least in our country here, there's 4 meals a day now. I discovered it at Denny's the other day, or maybe 2 years ago, and we're just stuffing our faces all the time, and that's very aligned with our kind of cultural ethos of constant growth and constant consumption. You know, we need to value restoration and repair. We need to balance the yang of growth with the yin of restoration, and you know, that means not eating all the time, giving your body a chance to repair, giving your dysfunctional cells a chance to break down into their component parts so the miracle of your body can rebuild those, you know, proteins from their amino acid building blocks or what have you. So I would just say that's the thing. A lot of protein, a lot of fiber, and just don't eat all the time.
I love that. The
And
fasting thing is such a game changer, I feel like.
Yeah, so I
As I'm
want to
sitting here,
color
like,
that though for women because you know you did ask me that specifically,
yeah,
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really don't
please.
want to forget about that, which is, you know, obviously, so that's a general principle what I just aligned, and then there's like, okay, let's get more specific because for women, fasting during menstruation or gestation or menopause, there's all sorts of subtleties there. And so, you know, this is where I would like really suggest like women. There's a wonderful, wonderful book by a doctor named Mindy Peltz called Fast Like a Girl. She talks about the interrelationship between fasting and female hormones, way, way better than I could. But this is where, there are subtleties. But I would say like the overall principle of fasting is a very, very good one for anybody, because no one's supposed to eat all of the time. And it also trains you, like I said before, to discern between biological needs and psychological desires.
Yeah, it's so good, so powerful. It's so interesting, because a lot of the things I talk about with human design is that, for me, one of the reasons why I want to share it with the planet, we want to take human design mainstream, is because it's all about becoming the authority, the primary authority in your own life, instead of constantly giving your power away, giving your authority
Mm.
away, being able to trust yourself, to make correct decisions for you, and work with the correct teachers or work with the correct doctors, as opposed to just assuming that just because someone is a doctor, for example, they know everything that's correct for you. I literally had a friend of mine's mother that was in hospital for a week last week, telling the doctors she had shingles, and they were like, well, there's no rash, so you don't. And they sent her home, and sure enough, the rash came out. So
Mhm.
that's a lot of what I'm teaching, and I want people to learn to be able to trust themselves. And I think fasting, for me, I remember, as a kid, I never ate breakfast. Like, I just didn't eat it. Yet I would eat so much at lunchtime and at dinner time, but just naturally do this. And when my kids were little, it used to blow me away that they would be constantly telling us to give them snacks and always have food in your bag. And I was like, that can't be good for them. So gratefully, I didn't go down that path. And now I have kids that are really, they don't emotionally eat. They,
Mhm.
well, all of us do sometimes, I feel.
Yeah.
Whereas I had a real issue, because my mum was actually undiagnosed anorexic. So I had all of
Mm.
this sort of learned behavior. And now I'm post-menopausal. I went through menopause really early, and just I will fast most days, and then some mornings I just wake up starving, and I'm like, did I drink enough water last night? I'm like, okay, clearly today's the day that I actually need to eat, so I'll eat breakfast on those days. So just learning just to trust ourselves when we have these principles, um, intertwining that with our own self trust.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my friend Will Cole has a whole philosophy of intuitive fasting, which is basically what you just put your thumb on, is, you know, really having refining that awareness of your body and what it needs. For me, it's like, I mean, your body is more optimized to metabolize food earlier in the day. And so if you were really wanted to, follow all the rules, your fasting window would probably be like, I don't know, from like 9, or your eating window would be like from 9 to 5. But of course, that would be so unfriendly. I would never have dinner with my children. So these are the things, where I don't think, a fundamentalist approach to everything is always, adaptive or beneficial.
Mm.
But I would say that was a huge one for me. I mean, I also lost a ton of weight. I was 60 pounds heavier, and fasting was a pretty significant component to
I
that. I
can't
mean,
even imagine. I can't even imagine you being overweight. Obviously, it's a large part of the story, and the reason why you do what you do today.
yeah.
But
Well, I was
clearly, just
diabetic 4 years ago. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
wow,
yeah, it was nuts. Yeah.
yeah. Well, again, that's that whole the 1-3 profile, the selfish journey, and how much it's given back to the world. Now, I'm super conscious of your time, and I do want to ask you about your course, the course that you've just released on Commune about good stress,
Okay.
because we hear so much of all the bad stress and all the things we're doing wrong, and how we're all basically screwed. And I don't really for me personally, I don't believe that's true. I believe that we're in this really powerful time in human history. Although there's a lot of darkness, a lot of challenge, I also believe that there's this huge time of opportunity. Like I could not be more excited to be alive right now. And I feel like stress is one of the things that is causing so much damage. However, it's also the thing that helps us live longer and experience more vitality. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about this course of yours that you've just released.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. And yeah, I've just spent 3 days with my daughter, so you keep touching on topics that I've explored with her, and this is exactly what I told her, that this is the best time in human history to ever have been alive, and we wouldn't even know it half the time because we are absolutely bombarded with sort of algorithmically designed bad news, that leverages our human negativity bias and puts us in this state of amygdala hijack that can be, so detrimental to both physiological and psychological health. And, we are designed, again, we evolved to experience stress, but we were designed generally to move through it and metabolize it quite quickly. So, I live up here in the hills of in Los Angeles, and there's tons of coyotes up here. And so just like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, I ran into a coyote on the trail, and the trail's quite narrow, and I had a stress response, and we all know it when we experience it. Our heart rate goes up, we take a big breath, or our respiratory rate goes up, our underneath the cluster of consciousness, all sorts of things are happening. You release a lot of cortisol that tells your liver to release a bunch of glucose to go to your extremities, to fight or flight. And then that's what happened. And, the coyote pretty quickly realized that, I would not qualify as lunch on that particular day. And he kind of slinked off down the hill off the trail. And what happened? My body quite naturally did what it was supposed to do, which was return to homeostasis, right? So my heart rate went down, my breath rate went down, the aperture of my attention opened up back up. I became less self-obsessed, all the things that one should normally do when they have a stress response. The problem comes is that in modern society, the coyote never slinks off for so many people. And, we very much know, and I'm sure your audience is very, very familiar with, what happens when people are chronically stressed, just hormonally. I mean, anyways, I won't go through the litany of things and all of the modes of action of why all this stuff happens, but essentially, your immune system goes haywire because because cortisol eventually will destroy your gut and lead to a chronic inflammatory response. It will at the same time lower your ability to make your better innate immune cells. So you're both overactivated and underactivated. It also raises blood glucose levels over time that can lead to obesity and diabetes and all these things. But we also just know by dint of our own personal experience that being in a stressed state all the time creates a life just of anxiety and misery. And we, like we talked about before, when you're in that like cortisol activated place, it's very, very hard to build and develop human relationships because you just don't trust the world. That is a sort of an adaptive response. When you're stressed, when you have a normal stress response, your focus turns inward. But when you're chronically stressed, turning inward all the time is not an adaptive way to live. So that's the negative side of chronic stress. The thing is that when we self-impose certain forms of deliberate stress, what's known as good stress or eustress or adversity mimetics, we can actually build a lot of resilience. And that's what I'm really keen to teach people about. Fasting is certainly one of them. We've extolled the many, many virtues of fasting already, it is a self-imposed eustress, because really what it does is it aligns us with all of those Paleolithic stressors that led to so much resilience. We vilify fat, for example. We're a culture that celebrates people that are lean and slender, but fat is very adaptive. We were designed to put on fat a little bit in the late summer and in the fall because the paucity of winter was coming. But now, of course, there's no winter. So, as it pertains to food, we have a surfeit of calories all the time. So we need to self-impose the stress of food scarcity in order to actually align ourselves with our engineering. And this is true for so many elements of life. We love watching Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm. We love our 24/7 access to on-demand entertainment, but that is absolutely driving our endocrine system haywire. So we actually have to self-impose some forms of stress, which is like getting the right kinds of light at the right times of day in order to balance our circadian rhythm and make sure cortisol is going up at the right time and waning at the right time and melatonin goes up at the right time. I mean, I'm a big cold plunger and sauna guy. A lot of that for me is like trying to escape the convenience of like thermoneutrality. We're so used to the digital thermostat on the wall that keeps us at a snuggly little, Fahrenheit, it's like 72 or whatever you want to be. But again, we didn't evolve with that kind of thermoneutrality. We evolved to be, to respond to the fluctuations of nature. And so now in this day and age, where we don't use our internal thermostat in our hypothalamus, we use the digital one on the wall in the den, we actually have to self-impose some forms of good stress to build that resilience. And so I get in the cold plunge every morning and I get myself uncomfortably hot every morning. And over time, you begin to stack a lot of these kind of discomforts, but they have unbelievably amazing benefits. And that's really what I've learned across almost all the components of my life is that, self-imposing hard things really has tremendous benefits, and it makes other hard things easier.
Yeah.
Especially because you're going to run into stress inevitably in your life. And then do you have the tools to be able to properly manage that stress and to move back to center, move back into balance? And, ironically, through good stressing yourself out, you build the capacity to be able to do that.
Yeah, I love that. And as you said, it's like it might be getting in and out of a sauna and a cold plunge, but it's the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. So it's building that muscle everywhere. In my work at the moment, I'm talking a lot about business and using human design to create success, because I've had a lot of business success and I've broken every freaking rule. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that what you're saying, like doing the hard thing, especially in startup mode, if you ask me what was the greatest thing that got me from startup to growth, was just my ability to get out of my comfort zone, was just my ability to do the thing I didn't want to do, or to face the fear, or to be like, okay, well, maybe no one's listening, or maybe people don't like me, or maybe I'm not good enough, but I'm just going to do it anyway. So I feel like all areas of our life benefit from us getting uncomfortable and doing the hard thing, because it gives us the opportunity, again, something I'm always banging on about, to really start to know the potential. Like there's this really cool potential that lies within us. Like, don't we want to know what that is? So
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of that stuff, and my 17-year-old's already in the cold plunge, like he's building this habit, early on.
Yeah. And, like fasting, the cold plunge has tons of physiological benefits. It was huge to reverse my metabolic dysfunction. But again, where I found it to be most potent was as a psychological resilience tool. I mean, I actually double down on the cold plunge when I'm going to the dentist. It sounds crazy,
That's
but
brilliant.
it's like no one loves a 12-inch needle going into your mouth.
Nah.
Um, and you're going to have that same stress response, at the dentist, or it's like the coyote, right? So, but you can train yourself, by getting into 50-degree water. Honestly, cold is very subjective, so it's just, you're going to get the benefit if it just feels cold.
Yeah.
But the bottom up involuntary response to being cold is that epinephrine that comes up your body, that makes you take that breath, and like palpates your heart, and makes you feel like there's going to be this sense of panic. And then you have that moment where you can apply the breath, you can apply the prefrontal cortex to actually put top down pressure back down on that bottom up involuntary response. And over time, you really refine that capability to be able to do that, such that then you can leverage that when you go to the dentist, or when you get the middle seat on the airplane, or whatever drives you crazy. And so these are, I think, some of the important aspects of leaning into, discomfort. I agree that in some ways, what limits us is chronic ease. And I always say that, chronic dis-ease really has its origin in chronic ease. But I also think the lack of fulfilling our own potential sometimes also rests upon, our inability to break out of chronic ease.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, one of the big principles that I talk about, I talk about purpose a lot. And I believe, because before I came to human design, that's a lot of the work that I would do. It was a lot around performance, working in the corporate sector, helping people succeed. And my own story started at the age of 28, when I was diagnosed with depression and panic disorder, and told, well, you'll live with it. You're going to live with it for the rest of your life, but you can learn to manage it. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not an option. Like, it was very dark for me. I was considering taking my own life for many, many years. And that was the thing. And now I know that whenever we're in that dark night, like, that's your purpose. You're already on purpose. So what is the problem you need to solve, or who do you need to become, or what do you need to, what challenge do you need to face? And for me, I think that is where we find this greatness that lies within us. And, it's that journey of becoming. It's that journey of continuing to lean in and kind of like work out what is going on in here, and what am I here to do and to give to the planet, and how can I access the greatness that lies within me. And again, this is the time. In human design, we really talk about this new paradigm. I mean, every spiritual methodology has a story about this time in history, and for us, we're shifting into this new, what we call the new paradigm. And it's such great opportunity, but with transformation comes challenge. We have to face the challenge to be able to transform. Otherwise, we just stay the same. So anyway, I am so grateful to have had this time. So thank you so much. Please share with my listeners where they can find you and your podcast and your online offering.
Yeah, sure. Well, Commune is my habitat. So you can go to that's ONE, commune.com, and see all the kind of treasure trove of courses we have there. And have a little imposter syndrome having my own course up there, but you can check out Good Stress if you want to get into some of these adversity mimetics. I really go pretty deep into breaking down all the protocols, and so many of these protocols actually have their origin in spiritual practices, which is really interesting. So I talk a lot about that as well. And then a lot of the kind of more geeky science benefits there. So check that out. And I have a podcast called the Commune Podcast, which is on all the podcatchers. And yeah, I kind of wax alternately poetic and pathetic on Instagram at Jeff Krasno. So that's where I am.
I love it. Brilliant. Jeff, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you're putting out into the world. Oh, and thank you for Big Day Out, because they were really, really epic. I enjoyed all of them. And yeah, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone for playing along today. I trust you got what you needed from today's episode, and I so look forward to having you on the next one. Bye for now. Thanks everyone for being here all the way to the end of the podcast. I hope you got lots of value out of it. I certainly had a lot of fun doing it. Could I please ask that you share this podcast with friends if you found it valuable? And also, bonus points, could you leave a review for me as well on Apple? It would be greatly appreciated. If at any point you would like to be on the podcast, or you've got questions that you'd like me to discuss on the podcast, by all means get on my socials and DM me. Everything you need is there in the show notes. Have an awesome day. Bye for now.